Hey friends, this is Matt Fordham from Seattle in the United States. I'm going to show you how I use effects racks in Ableton to do a wet-dry balance on effects without needing to have one built into the plugin. So I will put one on this loop I have here. And a little bonus tip, I have all my racks named with a QQ at the end. Which just means I can search quickly for that and nothing else gets in the way. I don't have any samples with QQ in the name. So that's a nice way to keep those searches fast and clean. So in my sort of generic wet-dry rack, I don't have any effects in here already. I have other racks here like for reverbs, which are basically this with that plugin in there already, which I'll show you in a moment. So here I've got to put one in there. So I'll just grab kind of a stock reverb and put it in there. Okay, so in two chains, we got the dry chain and the wet chain. The wet chain has a few things, including the plugin that is our effect. I need to make sure that that's 100% wet in this side here. And then with this, I can balance between them like you would expect. A couple other little bonus features here. I can turn the volume of the wet and dry up independently, which is a little different from the wet dry and comes in handy sometimes, but most of the time I leave those at 0. The panning is super handy, and oftentimes I'm wanting to create a little space by having the dry signal and the reverb or the delay or whatever pulled apart from each other in the mix, and this makes that super easy. So here, hopefully you can hear that the dry is on one side, the wet's on the other. So that's nice and handy. I also have a high pass filter at the end of the chain here, the wet. So by pulling that up, it's mapped to the cutoff of that filter. So I can pull out low end from the reverb. You might move that to the beginning of the chain here and put it before the reverb or the delay. It just depends on the effect. If it's like a delay effect that has some overdrive in it, I might want the low end to drive the echo a little bit, but then pull out the low end after the fact. So just depends. The send here is kind of handy for doing a reverb and delay throws, like you would do to create like a dub effect or something. Let's push up the decay here, and now it's down all the way so we won't hear anything, and then when I push it up, so that way the reverb can continue to reverberate without any more dry signal being sent into it. And you can of course do that with sends and returns, but here it's on this channel. I can automate it, and using the returns thing is okay, but it has its own challenges and its own problems, especially for, in my opinion, in my experience, electronic music, where I'm not trying to create realism so much as interesting sounds. Anyway, so that's great for sending things or automating effects that move. And then my favorite feature is the ducking here. So I'll bring the reverb back to a reasonable decay length, and I'll show the compressor. So when the ducking macro is turned up, the threshold on the compressor is turned down, which gives us more compression. The sidechain of the compressor is set to the post effects sort of tap from the dry chain, right? So the dry chain, which is empty, by the way, there are no effects, but still the post effects will basically tell the compressor when to compress. So with this, what happens is when the dry signal hits, the reverb gets out of the way. So I'll crank it to make it sort of obvious. Okay, let's maybe 2 cranked. Let's pull this back. So you can hear there, hopefully, that when the loop is sounding, the reverb is not. And then in the spaces between the kicks and the hi-hats and the snare, we hear that reverb come forward. In moderation, it works well, like if you were mixing a rock band even, but obviously it can work well nice as a more prominent and obvious effect. Great for delays and reverbs, time-based effects, obviously. And the settings on the compressor, I might go in there and tweak depending on the tempo and things like that with the attack and release. And those, of course, could be mapped to more macro knobs. So in my library of effects here, or racks, I should say, I have, like pre-built wet dry racks for specific plugins that I use a lot. For example, like the Valhalla Vintage, same stuff on here, just preset with the Valhalla effect. And something else that is kind of a nice bonus here is that there's some plugins where you can't change the default settings. So by wrapping them in an effect rack, you can save whatever defaults you want in there. And then you can name it whatever you want, so you can search for it however you want. So I think that's it. Happy Ableton Living, I guess.